I wanted to take a minute to thank Northeast Farrier Supply for sponsoring our podiatry clinic in April 2022. They always put their customer first and have a wide variety of farrier supplies, including the new Eclipse horseshoe, made out of a patented polymer that mimics the natural elasticity of the barefoot hoof. The Eclipse shoe was designed by a Cornell-trained vet and farrier and is economically priced to be able to help more horses. You can check them out at northeastfarrier.com. Welcome to the Humble Hoof Podcast. My name is Alicia Harlov. This is a podcast for both horse owners and hoof care professionals, offering discussions into various philosophies on the health of the hoof and soundness of your horse. Please check us out on Facebook or at thehumblehoof.com. I know a lot of us were always taught that it's taboo to talk about money. We should just keep our finances and our money habits private. That's not for public conversations. Well, today's conversation is going to be doing the exact opposite, diving into the costs and considerations hoof care providers make when setting their prices. I think many pros, let alone owners, have no idea exactly what it costs us to run our businesses. I chatted with 4 hoof care providers from 3 different countries to discuss what some of the hidden costs are in hoof care, how we can minimize our expenses, and why it can seem like hoof care sometimes is quote-unquote so expensive. Why don't we start with Carrie, because that's the first name that comes up on my list. If you want to just say, what area you work in, what kind of work you do.
Okay. So my name is Carrie Rule, and I'm with Onacona Farrier Service, and I service most of East Central Illinois, as well as Southern Illinois and West Central Missouri, which is mostly like the St. Louis area. And I was certified with Ida Hammer under her whole horse certification. And I also do nail-on shoes in addition to composite shoeing. And my primary goal is healthy barefoot. And I learned how to shoe, understanding that not all horses are completely healthy barefoot. And there are applications where you do need a nail-on shoe.
All right. Rose, do you want to go next?
Yes. Hi. So I'm Rose Zwanenburg. I'm in Nova Scotia, Canada. And I say the whole province because it's like real small, so I'll pretty much go anywhere. But I stay I'm located basically right in the center of the province, and I kind of have a range that's like an hour and a half radius around me, although one of those arms is the ocean, so I don't go that way. So I do barefoot trimming, and I do composite shoeing, both nail and glue-ons. Similar to what Carrie said, my goal is kind of always, can I get this horse healthy enough to go barefoot? But I learned to shoe because, frankly, part of it was a business-based decision. I think that makes sense for what we're talking about for the podcast, is that the market in my area for people who were super dedicated enough to make all of the changes they needed for total barefoot rehab just wasn't going to allow me to eat and have enough folks. So I needed some more tools in my toolbox. So I don't nail steel or other metal, but I do nail composite or do glue-on packages and boot fitting. So that is me.
Awesome. And Kristin?
Hi, yeah, I'm Kristin Thornberry, and I am located in Northwest Arkansas, and I am also predominantly a barefoot trimmer. And I actually used to be a traditional farrier back 15 years ago when I started this. And it's so funny that the other people on the call have said that they're offering nail-on composites, because I've actually been considering getting back into that as well for similar reasons. But right now, I predominantly do everything through barefoot. I have a handful of clients that I have in glue-on shoes, and I also do form a hoof. And before I was a farrier as well, I used to do a lot of training with problem horses. So I don't do any lessons or training anymore, but it's just hoof care. But it's, it all revolves around my love for the horses always. And that's really why I wanted to get on here and have this discussion that we're all going to have today, because I think it's so important for everybody that's in this business right now. But yeah, that's me. That's it.
Awesome. Hey, I think Libby just hopped on.
Hello. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
If you want to say your name and what area you work in and what kind of focus you have in your hoof care practice.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Libby Thorman, Thorman. I work out of Fife in Scotland, but I cover, well, probably won't mean anything to you guys, Stirlingshire, Perth and Kinross and Edinburgh. So basically, pretty much an hour and 15 minutes radius drive away is the easiest way I can describe it. I've been at this about, I think it must be about 17 years now. And I started off because our local farriers were rubbish.
And
well,
sorry, go on.
They weren't necessarily, I didn't really know that they were rubbish at the time, if you like, but I had a horse and one heel on him, one of his feet seems to be growing at a funny angle compared to the rest. And I kept asking, we had various farriers come through the area at the time, and I kept asking and saying, oh, what about this? And they were all going, oh, it's just the way he is. And I'm going, but it's not just the way he is. There's something funny happening. And it wasn't until a friend of mine printed off some stuff from Pete Ramey. And then he talked about how to get a heel to grow straight. And I went, well, if it can be done, why aren't the farriers doing it? So I ended up having to go myself, and the thing grew straight. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. 17 years later, I'd given up my what was full-time job, and I'm now doing this pretty much full-time and enjoying it, So there you go.
Awesome.
Yeah, bit late in life, but that's the way it goes. So.
Yeah. Awesome. So, when we all started in Hoofcare, I know that I didn't really have a very firm grasp on how I should be pricing my work. And I would love to hear if any of you had better strategies than I did on, when you started your business, how were you determining what your prices were going to be for clients?
I'm probably the newest one of us here. So it's very fresh in my mind. And I think like what you said earlier, Alicia, before we sort of officially started was like, hey, what are other people pricing going for in the area? That was a big determining factor, which I could be fancy and call market research, but is also just laziness. So, I remember when I started it, I had an idea of what I thought would be reasonable based on what I wanted to be making and what I know people were charging. And I do remember also feeling a little anxious because I was going to be charging more out of the gate than the barn farrier where I board for just a basic trim. And I remember feeling ooh, I don't know if I can do that. So that was my first act of standing up for my work as a business person was no, it's fine. I can do that. It's only $5 more, whatever. You can do it, lady. So that's where I started. So not very sophisticated.
Yeah, mine was similar. I apprenticed for a while with the AFA certified farrier, and I looked at what he was charging and I was like, well, I can't charge that much because he has so much more experience than I do,
right.
And so I'm first of all, I am terrible at the business side of things, or have been through the years. So starting out, I was just horrendous with how I priced my services and my skills. But I started off what I feel is pretty low. Cause like I said, I learned how to issue and trim about 15 years ago. And what I am charging now is what he was charging then. And so, and even though now I know a lot of customers think that I'm on the high end for my area, I mean, the cost of living has increased so much since then.
Yeah.
That I'm
since last week.
Right, exactly. And I'm overall as an industry, I think farriers, barefoot trimmers, everybody involved in this trade, I don't think we have either started charging enough at the very beginning, like I did. I certainly did not. And then have not kept pace with the cost of living in the areas where we work.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's some of our biggest struggles. I've helped a couple of newer farriers in my area, and they always come up with the same thing of, I was really fortunate when I started out. So my boyfriend is self-employed. So, he and I were able to sit down and say, okay, what do I need to cover the bills that I have? And that includes the expenses of buying my tools, keeping the truck up and running. And then we were able to sit down and be okay, I need to make XYZ a month to make sure all of my needs are met. And I've seen it a lot with newer farriers. So around my area, $45 per trim is kind of the standard rate. And these new guys would come up and they'd be like, well, I should be charging like 30 or 35 because I don't have the experience. And then what happens is they're basically doing all this work to go to their client's house and actually do the work. And a lot of people don't realize that a lot of farriers, at the end of the day, when all of our expenses are taken care of, we don't even make minimum wage.
That's exactly where I was at. I was that new farrier that was charging $35 a horse. And I even distinctly remembering I had one client that bargained with me for that price because she thought I was too high. And I ended up doing her horses for $20 a head.
Stop it.
No, not even joking. No, exactly. Like I said, I am terrible at the business side of things. I have improved over the years. That is not me now. That was the old me. But no joke. And I just, wanted to be there to help the horse and was so concerned that if I argued back with her, or debated the price of my trim with her, that I would lose the client. And back when I was getting started, I was so concerned about losing clients that I tried to keep my prices low in order to keep them.
I looked at what the farriers were charging because basically I was going to be in direct competition to them. Went along that lines. I knew there was a couple of trimmers who visited the area and they charged through the nose. And I thought, well, they are traveling a long way, so it's not worth me. I think that's being greedy, charging that. So I didn't. In 17 years, the only thing I've really done is if I've got a new person coming on, I've taken distance more into the equation and just charged more for the actual mileage side of things. The biggest saving that I gave myself was to change to Cody James rasps from standard rasps.
Yeah. And I remember when I started, I was stressing about pricing and, I had already been trimming for a little bit, and I messaged my friend Beth Lewis, who's been on this podcast a few times, and asked her like, oh my goodness, what should I charge? I know that I'm new and I don't want to charge, XYZ. She said, well, how much does a trim cost you? And I was like, what?
Yeah.
What is that even? I was like, cost me? I don't know. Like, I show up with my tools and I trim the foot. What do you mean? What does it cost me? And she's like, well, for each horse on your books, like how much of your expenses are divided up for that horse? Like how much is, everything, your tools, your rasps, your nippers, your knives, your insurance, like all these kind of things, like how much of that is devoted to one horse. And when I first started, I was charging, a lot less than I am now because I was like, well, I'm new. I can't charge that much. And trims were taking me a lot longer. So I was already paying myself less that way. But I realized when I first started, a trim was costing me just over $19 when I divided up my supplies. And I was charging like barely double that. So yeah, it was something I'd never thought about. So I thought we could talk a little bit about our expenses and where that kind of comes in. So obviously all of us, I think, do a little bit of, specialty shoeing and taking into account like therapeutic cases. So I thought we could talk a little bit about the cost there, which I know is going to be a lot different than the cost of a trim.
Oh, yes. You're sure right.
But I think a lot of people have this idea that, farriers make so much money shoeing, and shoeing is where all the money is. And, maybe we could break down some of that.
What I find interesting about that is that, like, I feel like I get caught between these two perspectives of like, if I go at shoeing, like even if I do like a basic, let's say like my most basic nailed on composite package, like the shoes that I tend to use the most for nailing are Duplos. And if I get like the most basic pair I can, that costs me like $35. And then, nails, like they're not expensive, but they're not free. And I rarely shoe anything without like packing with a little bit of dim. So like at the absolute bare bones, it's costing me say like $50 or $55 to just like to have the materials, the shoeing materials. And then there's, of course, like you mentioned earlier, the rasps and the hammer and nippers and blah, 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 all of the tools that we need on top of just trimming tools. So like clinchers and etc. So I feel like, the cost is already to me so much higher than just a trim, which is not nothing. And so like you can go at it from this perspective of pure business, like, okay, well, I charge like X% markup and then I charge my time and then I charge my trim. And by the time I get to that, I'm like, okay, so would you like to pay $350 for like a half set of shoes when everyone who's nailing on steel charges like 120? How does that sound? Does that sound good to you? And then I find my heartstrings getting tugged because I'm like, oh, well, I know that this would be really good for the horse. I'm like, okay, well, I can probably get like this many resets out of this pair of shoes. Like, what if I like go down by this much and then I'm still making that much, but I can still help the horse? And I just get like caught in this little tsunami, which is, I don't know, it's hard. It's hard to look at it as like, for me anyway, as just business, which is probably to my detriment, but I don't know. It's like we're dealing with like humans and animals here.
Right.
Oh yeah. I feel the same way. I make the most money by far off of doing just trims.
Same.
When I calculate it out. Yep. And I can do 3 to 4 horses in an hour. When I'm doing my most basic like glue-on shoe package, it usually takes me an hour and a half to 2 hours, plus the cost of materials. So when I did the math on all that, and this is for my most basic package, I usually use around 1 tube of a polyurethane glue with, say, like an Easy Care Performance shoe. And I basically only make money off of my trim while I do that. And like I said, I can trim 3 to 4 horses in an hour. When a pair of glue-on shoes takes me an hour and a half to 2 hours, I'm not getting paid for any of that time, basically. I've spent the money on the materials, and I've been paid for my trim. So I try to tell people when they're looking at the cost of a glue-on shoe package that in comparison to the money I make trimming, I'm losing money applying them. So when people, have complaints about the price point for those products and services, it can be a little frustrating, when they don't understand my business model. And like you said as well, that like we're all in it for the horse. And so it does tug at our heartstrings, and we want to do the best we can for the horse and provide them with the best care possible and the best setup and shoeing package that will help them.
Right.
And that's really like a catch-22. You're always in between a rock and a hard place between doing the right thing and being compensated for your time.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like this is like going to be a showcase of like, hey, bad business practices 101. How not to emotionally run your business. A seminar.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny because obviously we can talk about the individual supplies that we have to have in order to apply a glue on. Like, before I even touch the horse, I'm already in over $100, of expenses.
Right.
Just in what I'm, what I've bought to put on the horse. But I think a lot of people don't even recognize the other kind of unseen expenses.
Good point.
And I probably should have put this question before that, just so that we can back up and really look at what money is going out in order to just operate as a business. Like, where are those expenses going? 3 things that popped into my head that I feel like I'm always like, spending so much money on is continuing education, which I like refuse to compromise on. Professional memberships, which I'm a part of a few different organizations, and insurance and wear and tear on my body, let alone my vehicle. So like these are things that I'm constantly spending money on because I am in this business, where if I had a desk job, I wouldn't be necessarily spending this money.
Who wants to go first?
So I think like the unseen expenses, I've been thinking about that a lot. I guess one thing that has been coming up for me is coming out of like a corporate world, like a salaried job, where it's like, oh, if I like don't work, it's cool, I'm still paid or whatever. And I'm like, nope, don't get paid if I don't work. So the idea is like building in safety nets for ourselves, I think is really important. Like I'm coming into a period of probably like 3 or 4 weeks where I can't work at all. And I'm super fortunate that I don't have to be worried about paying medical bills because of health coverage, but I am not going to be making any money for those weeks. And I'm feeling good about the fact that I have built in to my pricing enough that I can feel like marginally okay over the next few weeks. But I also suspect that none of my clients, even the ones who would like very happily be like, yes, do that, we appreciate you being alive, probably don't think about the fact that when they pay me for whatever service, they're also like paying for those times that I might not be able to come and work for them so that in the future I can do it again.
Right.
So we really have to be like every single thing for ourselves. And I think that's just like the life of any business owner. But like our business really is our bodies in such a specific way that there are these things that probably go on that maybe don't go into people's minds when they're thinking about what that money goes to.
Yeah.
Well, I took some advice. This was a very long time ago, and it wasn't just, it was from a money man rather than anybody else. It was just somebody who fills out advice. And he basically said, whether you're self-employed, whether you're in a job or whatever, he reckons that you should all have 2 to 3 months worth of bills and a little bit more tucked to one side, so that if you're made redundant or you're self-employed and you can't work, then you've covered your own backside, basically.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about wear and tear on our body, I know that in Canada and in the UK, you guys have health insurance where you don't necessarily have to like pay to go, like if you have an injury or if you have, like, do you guys have to pay for the chiropractor or like the physical therapy?
Well, I did last year. I had tennis elbow, and I ended up paying for private care, basically because we had COVID here. But although we have national health, if you have an accident, somebody kicks you or something, yeah, you're going to get taken off to hospital and all the rest of it and dealt with for free. And probably from that, you would end up having physio that you would be referred to. And again, that would be through the National Health Service. But for me to get an appointment at the moment with like a physio, for instance, would take me months because the queue is so long. So yes, last year I paid for private physio to get my arm sorted out because I needed it.
Yeah, it's similar here. So like we have like universal health care. So like we can go to the hospital and like your family doctor and everything is covered if you're like a citizen or some particular immigration statuses. But for services like physio or chiropractic, unless they're part of like your hospital stay or you get referred to like a particular like program from the hospital that is no cost, then you do pay out of pocket for those or need to like go through private insurance.
Yeah.
But like we don't have like, I just came out of the hospital and I don't have any bills that are coming with me out of that. So that's lovely.
Yeah.
I know. I was thinking about that the other day. I actually read a comment that another farrier had posted, and this will sound way worse coming from a woman, but he said, we rent our bodies out. That's part of our job. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds awful when I say it. But like when you said it, I was like, no, that's a very valid point. It is a tough job physically. And we only have a certain number of horses in us because there is so much wear and tear on our bodies, like even working on the best horses, right?
Totally.
That stand really well and don't pull their feet away and aren't dangerous to handle. And yeah, the not having the PTO or paid time off, it is very difficult, isn't it?
It's not the best.
No, we've had a rough winter here in Arkansas. Well, sort of. It's been weird. It's been very up and down. But in February, I had a 2 different sets of 1 week time periods where I didn't work at all. I think I worked about 10 days in February due to weather because in the state where I'm at, we don't generally have harsh winters. So the area is not set up to facilitate them when they occur.
Right.
So you can't drive anywhere. You get stuck at home. A lot of my clients don't have a facility where we could work inside if the weather is bad. And so, 10 days in February, that was it. And I'm actually the sole provider for my family right now. So when you have a month like that, the stress starts to set in and you're like, oh my gosh, did I put enough away? And, and I'm like, is it that fragile? Our business is that fragile? Why is it that fragile? And then for me, one of the unseen costs that I think a lot of clients maybe don't consider or realize is the cost of rescheduling people. Mm-hmm. You never actually get that money back. It's not like you go a week later and you do those horses. It's like, no, because then their next schedule is pushed out another, 4 to 8 weeks, whatever schedule they're on. So you don't actually get paid for what you would have been paid if you hadn't have had to reschedule all those people. The timeline just gets pushed out further.
Right. You're not like deferring the payment that you'll have.
No.
You're just sort of like, you're basically losing that payment.
Exactly. It's just gone. Poof, gone. And, and for some people that are rescheduling for some of these services that take a lot of time, care, and consideration, that can be very difficult. Like I had a Hoof application get rescheduled 3 times. And some of those things were for reasons beyond our control, like people were sick or, things like that. But I schedule a half a day of work specifically for when I do a Hoof application. And so when you reschedule that 3 times, that's like a loss of a day and a half of work. It's just gone.
Right.
And that's probably one of the most difficult things with my business is that I reschedule people all the time for various reasons. It's just money gone. And then you try to reschedule those people in a timely manner to get to those horses because, it's a living, breathing thing. And they're going to have damage to their feet if they go a significant amount of time without being trimmed. And a lot of the horses on my books are rehabs, and some of them can't go more than 4 weeks. If they go 6 weeks instead of 4 weeks, they'll grow an inch a foot. So I try to fit them in as soon as possible. So I'll put them in maybe on a day where I'm working in an area that's not where that horse is. And then I'll start ping-ponging all around the county to try to fit all these horses in because they can't go any longer than what they've already gone, which is a very bad business practice, like we've all been discussing. That I lose so much money when I get to where I'm working outside of a specific area on a specific day and bouncing back and forth and spending lots of money on fuel and wasted time where I could be trimming other horses, like all these little things that go into having a successful business, and it's a mental struggle that, the rescheduling for me is a huge deal now that I'm actually sitting down and calculating, where I make money and where I lose money. Right. So I don't know if it's the same for anybody else.
Yeah, actually, when you were talking about rescheduling, something that really, struck me and that I've been thinking about the last few days is when people reschedule and I go back to them and, I can't fit them in immediately because I have a booked schedule. So if they cancel and I have to fit them in, sometimes it's going to be 2 weeks from then because I just don't have the time before that. Then those feet are in that much worse shape and that much longer, which you think, okay, like you lose a little bit in their hoof health, but you can get it back. But not only that, then I am taking, sometimes, twice as long on a trim for the same amount of money because they're off schedule. And because it's taking longer, a lot of times the horses, especially in rehab, aren't standing as well. They're uncomfortable. They, fight me a little bit more. I'm taking more time than I usually do. So then they might be yanking on my body, causing more pain. I mean, last week, because of a horse, I went to the chiropractor 3 times. And that's all expenses that are coming out of the money that we make because of what we do in our job.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
Yeah. And the body thing, that's where I struggled a lot when I first started out, because I would get those people that, they're like, we have 7 horses. So instead of $40 a trim, could you do like 25 to 30, like a multiple horse discount? And I talked a lot about that a lot with one of my mentors. And, I'm like, hey, so I think one of them was like a 501c3 rescue. And they had like 11 or 12 horses. So that would have been like a full day's work for me. And I'm like, they're asking about this discount, like how much off should I give them? And, like, how should I do this? Like, how do I put that on paper? And he kind of stopped and looked at me and he was like, why are you going to do that? Because somebody else had said in here, our bodies only have so many trims in them. This isn't a profession that you get in and you're going to do it for 40, 50 years and you're going to be healthy. Eventually you're going to look at rotator cuff surgery and back problems and knee problems. And that's if you don't get injured under the horse. So he's like, why are you going to undersell yourself and cutting your career that much shorter per horse, but basically just make enough money to pay for your tools and your drive there? And that bulb had gone off, and I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense.
I don't know if this is like a well-known quote or if someone told it to me directly. So if I'm like doing that thing where I'm like, my mom said this, but actually it's like Maya Angelou, like, please tell me, I would love to know. But somewhere I heard from someone at some point, the idea of just thinking about, you know, if you feel kind of compelled, like, oh, this is a rescue, these horses need help, they probably don't have that much funding, blah, blah, blah. And you're kind of like, oh, but it is not worth it as a business for me to go and like give a discount on these trims. The idea is that like, okay, so if you feel compelled to do that, then in your regular business, we should be aiming to like charge our typical customers enough so that if we have this feeling that we want to donate some services or like discount some services, that we actually aren't taking, like, it's not taking a hit. Like, it means that, you know, we may not be adding to the plus column, but we're not actually dipping into the minus column. And I feel like that's such a smart perspective and like useful words of advice from whoever said them to me or to someone else at any point in time. I think because a lot of us all of us, I think, get into this business because we feel really strongly about helping horses and helping the people who have those horses. And it's really hard to not be like, yeah, it's fine, I can take the hit. But we can't take the hit, and we should like find ways to do that are going to like still help, or at least not actively be detrimental to our businesses.
Right.
Oh yeah, I know. I completely know what you're saying, and like even my husband, he knows very little about horses, so he generally gives me decent business advice. But he said, you know, for a lot of these people, you know, that are asking for a discount, that's like going into Walmart, you know, and checking out with your groceries, and the checker says, you know, you owe $150 for your groceries. And you say, well, I only have 75, but can you still sell me all the groceries? And Walmart's going to say, no, you can put half your groceries back and you can pay for the 75 you can afford. And I'm like, we don't, for whatever reason, you know, I'm assuming it's because we deal with these big, huge live animals that we love, that we don't do that. You know, we don't necessarily look at our business model the same. And I know it's been detrimental to me where I'm like, oh, well, you can't afford it and this horse needs help, so I'm just going to do this for you, you know. But then it's also not fair to all my clients that are paying my standard rate. And so I've always been unsure what to do in those situations like you just discussed, where, you know, you have a rescue or you have a situation where maybe people can't afford it, but you still want to help the horse. And I actually had one thing that I was going to look into. I had a client tell me that that I think rescues can apply for grants for specific services or something like that. Because for me, I was like, I know a lot of these horses could really benefit from like a form hook application or from an expensive set of glue-on shoes, but there's no way that the rescue can afford it. And she said, no, there's grants for things like that. And I'm like, well, that's pretty interesting. I might need to look into that, you know, or discuss that with some of these rescues and see if they can look into it, where it makes some of these services more affordable to help some of these horses that really need it.
Yeah, and actually something that Beth Lewis does, I feel so funny. I'm mentioning her twice, like, oh, we love Beth. It's fine. Everyone loves Beth.
We're fangirling Beth. Yeah.
Also, she's like really great at running her business. So, but she trims at a few rescues, and one of her things that she does is she has them, you know, pay. So if she knows that she wants to give them a discount or she knows she wants to donate services, what she does is she has them pay the amount and then she donates it back to them. And that might sound really weird, but
oh no, that makes sense.
Because if it's a 501c3, you know, you're then getting a tax deduction for doing a service for free as opposed to just doing the service for free. And I liked that idea because obviously, you know, we want to help horses, but if that's not going to cost the rescue anything extra and it's going to, you know, give us a little bit of money off of our, you know, end of year expenses, then that's a huge help.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Something else that I think, at least for me, I've spent the most on, and maybe because I'm a wicked nerd, but is continuing education, and not even necessarily just the cost of a clinic and just the cost of a webinar. But for me, it's like traveling, like,
Right.
hopping on a plane, staying in a hotel, possibly renting a car, paying for meals somewhere else where I'm not cooking at home, just to learn how to do my job better has been a huge expense. And I don't know if you guys have, had to experience that.
Personally, I mean, I think I've paid for 1 or 2 webinars on certain topics, dissections and things like that. But actually, I mean, with COVID, we've all been slam dunked and can't go anywhere anyway. But there is so much now out there on the webs, which is free. But yeah, being able to contact people, and to be honest, people I found in the barefoot world who know more than me are more than happy to have a conversation about it. I'm more than happy to chat and share their findings.
Yeah, I just find so much benefit from going to like hands-on dissection courses, or like I've taken biomechanics courses. In the States, we're allowed to do like, I've taken like boot fitting, like gone and done boot fitting in person, or worked with different reps, or gone to conferences like the NAEP conference to see, I've been able to see Dr. Bauken in person, Paige Poss in person, other like at the horse, what are they doing? And I just find that to be so beneficial, at least for like in my practice, because I'm such a visual learner, that just reading something, sometimes I'm not always grasping what,
Yeah, I prefer a video and a conversation to reading a sheet of paper. But actually, there's very little in the UK.
Yeah, I don't really know what's over there.
I feel like from a business perspective, though, even like, so, Alicia, you're talking about, putting out a fairly significant output of expense to travel or pay for hands-on, learning experiences, or even, distance, but still like official courses or whatever. And, Libby, you're saying it's reading and reaching out to people, and a lot of that can be done without cost to you, but both incur time, right? So like you're both, whatever approach you take, you're still incurring like that time and energy that you're spending to improve and hone your skill and your understanding. And so it's great if I can spend, 2-3 weeks, like reading something and learning and practicing and doing it by myself, and it doesn't cost me any money, but it's still something that I have learned and improved on, so that as a business person in my practice, I can then charge for that. And I feel like I should charge for that because I'm offering a better and more comprehensive service. And that's maybe something that, from a client perspective, like I feel like all of these things, like none of our clients are going to be like, no, I disagree. But it's just things that maybe aren't thought about, when we show up and we trim, like, my most basic trims, I'm like bringing my hoof stand and my rasp and a couple other things out of the car and, setting up, doing my trim and going on my way. So it sort of seems really simple, but I could have done like a whole course in between the last time I trimmed them and this time. It could be like 4 or 5 weeks, and I could have learned an entirely new skill that I'm applying. And so that's something that, again, like if we're trying to be like business minded, we do have the option to kind of add that and say, hey, I've learned this and I've improved and I'm doing a better job. So that is reflected in how I'm going to charge you.
Oh, yeah. I have something to add to that as well, because I learned something amazing from one of Yogi Sharp's webinars that he recently had. Right. And like, thankfully, webinars are not hugely expensive, but, some of the clinics I go to, like, they are expensive, like you said, with travel and all the rest of it. But what I learned in that one webinar has helped so many horses, and like, I don't think that maybe some owners maybe understand the positive impact of the continuing education we all do, and how it directly benefits to their horse, to a point where it's like, if you didn't have that information, their horse might still be lame, or might become lame, or something that makes the horse completely unusable. Like, most clients that have horses, they want to ride, right? And like, we help facilitate that passion of theirs. Be thinking about that too, with like some added costs, like for the Metron hoof software, and for the Workman Black, like a lot of this technology that's coming out, where we're starting to see how positively that technology can improve our business and improve the health of these horses' hooves, but there's a cost to it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't even know how much some of that stuff costs, but I do know how much, you know, like the form a hoof costs me.
Right.
You know, and so for a lot of these new technologies that are improving our overall knowledge of hoof care, that's another cost I think we're all going to have to factor in for what we're charging for each horse.
I know that there are people that say like, oh, well, this trim only took you, 20 minutes, or this trim, it only took you this amount of time to do this thing. But if people think about the time we put in outside of the time at the horse, like the time we put into learning, and I mean, I know that those of us on this call are probably the ones that are reading and watching webinars and talking to other hoof care providers. And, we don't always take our time off as time off. We're putting in that time to learn more. And a lot of times we're coming to this horse and that might only take us a few minutes to correct that one thing on that horse, but it's taken us sometimes years to be able to have that skill to be able to come up there and do that one thing.
You don't pay me to take corn off. You pay me to know what to leave on.
Yeah. It's the knowledge, right? They're paying us for the knowledge in what we're seeing,
Yeah, and I think too, like when it comes to charging and how we can make these things, because we're trying to sort of have a discussion about, I guess, expenses and costs and expenses and pricing and that kind of thing. Like one strategy that I have been trying to apply is like taking my background. So what I did before moving full-time into hoof care was that I worked in communications. And so something that I've been trying to apply is really making sure that my clients know the kind of continuing education that I'm doing. So like Alicia, like I'm so jazzed that I'm going to come to the clinic that you're hosting in April. I've told literally every client about it, like mostly because I'm excited, but also it's strategic. And they see that like, okay, I'm going to these events, I'm learning things, I'm making connections with people. I also like if I encounter something that I'm, like maybe I'm not 100% confident on the best way to approach something. One of the strategies I have both to help the horse the best and also to make my clients feel reassured is that I let them know that I have a network of people who are, mentors and colleagues that I have available that I can reach out and have a discussion. So I can say like, hey, I'm going to talk to so-and-so and I'm going to come up with a plan and we're going to decide what to do. And I think that's super valuable. And the feedback that I've gotten from folks is like, oh my God, when I was working with, Joe Blow Farrier, and we have a really, really lovely farrier named Joe in my area. Joe, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking when I worked with, so-and-so for however many years, like they never mentioned that, or they never said they were going to these educational events. And maybe they did and maybe they didn't, but it certainly makes more sense for my clients if I'm charging, a higher rate or I have to charge more for a service. If I've been continually communicating with them that like, hey, I'm doing X and Y and Z, and this is how I'm improving, and this is how I'm making it better for your horse, they're like really chill about paying for that because they see the value. Like it's about making people see that you're bringing actual value to them rather than just like throwing a number at them that might be a little bit distressing if they just think of you as someone who shows up and does 20 minutes of work.
Right. Well said. I agree.
But it's hard because also it's like scary. You're worried that people are going to be like, no.
Right. I know, Carrie, I'm sorry you have, I want to make sure you didn't want to say anything. I know you've been a little quiet. No pressure.
Oh, yeah. And, like the continued education is absolutely huge. So I'm constantly kind of like Libby, I watch a lot of webinars and I have a small fortune of books that I've bought. I don't think I've bought one book that was under $100. And these are all expenses that I go through to make myself better for my clients.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that, people don't realize that without that exploration and continuing education, that our hoof care cases are more difficult the less knowledge we have, you know what I mean? It's something as simple, like you said, as diet, like knowing how to make those little diet adjustments makes our job easier and makes the horse healthier. Yeah. So I know that we've talked a lot about those, I mean, various unseen costs. And obviously it's different in different countries. Like, you know, in the States, we have to cover our insurance. Some of us might be looking at like liability insurance, obviously, you know, car insurance, that kind of thing. But what do any of you do to try to minimize costs in your business? I'll just say, like, I know routes, like travel routes is one big thing, but I don't know if there's any other things that you guys want to discuss.
I say changing to the Cody James RAS, actually, a lot of people don't like them, but a normal RASP over here is now about 30 quid each.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of horses where they're literally pulled out of the mud and handed to me. And, you know, people just don't understand respect anymore. I would never do that to a Hoofcare provider. But, you know, people don't understand it.
Yeah.
You wreck a RASP in one trim.
Yeah.
But with the Cody James RASP, you just keep going. And I think I was going through a normal RASP about every 8 horses over here. It was crazy at specific times of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of horses standing out in the middle of a field, you know. So every time you put the foot down, you pick it back up. I don't want to be pissing about cleaning it off every time. I just want to get on with the job.
Mm-hmm.
The Cody James, I maybe use 4 a year, so that's what.
Oh my God.
55 quid each. So that makes me 220 quid a year in RASPs.
That's amazing.
Where I was knocking on the door of 900 quid a year in RASPs with the other ones, and with the, you know, what do you do with them once they're done? You know, send them to scrap metal merchant, but it's using Earth's resources much faster, where I actually don't need to be. So it was things like that I was looking at. Yeah, car insurance, I always shop around when it comes to the renewal, and do what you can do on that. And again, actually, the other thing with buying the Skoda this time, my last car was £260 a year in road tax, and this one's 30 quid.
Wow.
Thank you very much. I'll have that.
That's even something I did notice too, like, because I'm from California originally, and I've been in Arkansas now for close to 12 years. And when we were paying, 12 years ago back in California for our vehicle registration, it was like, I think $450 for our trucks. And here in Arkansas, it's like $35 a year.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, there's huge discrepancy for, all of these Hoofcare providers in various states and countries for how much it costs them just to go across the road.
Yeah. And the routes has been the biggest thing for me because some of my clients are almost 3 hours away.
Wow.
Wow.
So I schedule them, like I have what I call my Southern Illinois A route and my Southern Illinois B route, my Central route, my Indiana route, and my Northern Illinois route. I don't go further north than Pontiac at this time. And that's about an hour north of where I live. And the first thing I do when a potential new client approaches me is I'm like, okay, where exactly is the horse located? And I have Google Maps set up and I have what I call my trimming map. And that's where I pinpoint all of the locations of different clients and they're all color coded. So like my Southern
that's so organized.
Yeah, I know. That's great.
But like my Southern Illinois A route is green and my B route is purple. So I may see that they're 10 minutes away from a purple mark. And I'm like, okay, so you're going to fit in on somewhere on this 3-day route that I have. And then I can look at the times and I've gotten really good at kind of guessing how long each stop will take me.
Mm-hmm.
And I normally schedule like a 10 or 15 minute window in between because, I might have to stop and get fuel, use a restroom, grab a quick bite to eat. And then so I could say, okay, so, you're 20 minutes away from this client. They normally take their appointments, say 9 o'clock in the morning, normally takes me an hour, I'm done by 10. I could be there at 10:30, 10:45. And that was
like my jaw's on the ground. I'm like, ooh, color coded Google Maps. I'm like feeling really proud of myself for my paper calendar.
Yeah.
I can screenshot it and I can send it to you. Like I need to update it because I've added a lot of new clients, but and that was huge because somebody said it before. So my first time going to Southern Illinois, I did a lot of that ping ponging. And because I went down there, and first of all, I did almost 35 horses in a day. And that was absolute terror. I could not move for days after that. So that was when I sat down and I was like, I have to do better at this. There's got to be a better way.
Wow.
And then that was when I created that map. And then I let the clients know, like, hey, I'm breaking this up in a 2-day thing. Does Friday or Saturday work better for you? And then that's where it kind of took off.
Wow. Yeah.
Right.
I think I'm like I said, newer than most of you, all of you, and definitely newer at being full time. And so, I'm fairly busy, but I wouldn't say that I'm like, my books are completely full. So one thing that I've had to do over the last little while is be really strict with myself about if I get a call from someone that's like, hey, are you available? Like, can you work for me? Like, technically I can look at my books and be like, yeah, totally, I can find a place for you. But I've had to be really on top of myself and say, like, if they're not within where I already service, I either have to say no, or I have to be really super upfront about what I will have to charge them to go see them as like a single trip, and about being really like, and this I think is just my personality, because I'm a little bit, I say I'm scared of confrontation, but I like think everything is confrontation. I'm like, I look at someone and I'm like, ooh, don't be too assertive. So, I have to be like, someone's like, oh, can you come soon? And I have to be able to say like, no, I can't come tomorrow, but I can come when I'm there in the area again in 4 weeks. And I think that seems super basic, but like, just as someone starting out, it can be tough. I have a blank day in my schedule. Well, why shouldn't I go out there and, see this person and then get them as a client? But ultimately it's super detrimental if you have people on these like insane, like you don't even have routes. You're just like zooping all over the place and spending literally all of your life on gas.
Right. And I mean, like you said, like when someone reschedules, that can add a huge expense.
Yeah.
Of just getting back out there again and trying to fit them in. Like you were saying, I mean, it goes back to our conversation about why rescheduling is costs us money,
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I had to do, and I started doing this last year, because there was a period of time where I hit where these clients they'd cancel on me at the last minute. And so I put together what I call a new client packet. And that outlines my expectations of the client, as well as what they can expect out of me. And then it has the full service list and what I charge. But, and part of that is I have what's called a customer loyalty program. So they could save a little bit of money after they've been on my roster for X amount of time. But it also had, and I don't know about everybody else, because in Illinois, there's no regulations against this, but I can store credit cards on file using Square. And in that contract, it outlines that if you do not, if you cancel and it's a non-event emergency. So, somebody, hey, I forgot our appointment. Like, can we reschedule? Then I have to charge a cancellation fee, and that's the cost of one trim.
Okay.
And because it was aggravating for me for a while, because there was one point when I went ahead and decided to pull the trigger on that. This gal had 10 or 11 horses. So I had half a day blocked off for them. And, the morning of, I'm on my way to their house. And then, I sent them a text message like, hey, I got to stop for fuel, but I'm running right on time. I'll be there at 10:30. And she was like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, I have to cancel.
Yeah,
and,
that's not cool.
Yeah. And I'm like, that was so frustrating for me. Like, especially I drive a diesel. That's my daily driver. And, I'm like, I just took all of this time. Like, I had other clients that I could have scheduled on this day. Like, what am I going to do? And so one of the things I go through is like, I see a therapist, because I see a lot of things. And I sat there and I was like, my therapist has a cancellation fee. Like, why don't I have a cancellation fee?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that's clearly outlined in that new client packet, which is essentially like a contract with the client.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. I have it on my website where I have expectations of my human clients and expectations of my horse clients. And then I have a form at the bottom of that page that I have new clients fill out. with pertinent information, but I also have all my services listed. And at the bottom of those services, I too have now implemented a last minute cancellation fee for the same reasons. It just started to get a little too out of control, and, it's taken hit after hit due to scheduling issues and no-shows and people forgetting our appointments and things like that. So that's definitely a opportunity cost to consider, I think, when we're formulating what we charge per horse as well. Like you said, there's all these hidden fees that don't get seen or discussed usually. And route for me is a big thing as well. Like, one thing I do have to say though is that my original mentor was a great businessman, and he was very good at telling me how he planned his routes and scheduled his clients. And he actually didn't travel more than 20 minutes in any direction from his house. And looking back, I'm like, no, I'm really impressed. How did you do that? How did you have a full book? Yeah. And only travel 20 minutes in any direction. But that's a huge consideration for me as well. Now over time, like I said, I was worse. I was much worse when I first started out. But now I've set my limits as I don't travel an hour or more than an hour in any direction. And I've actually recently, with everything that's going on in the world currently, I've cut that back, and I've opened up my books again for areas that are within 30 minutes of my house, so that I can actually hopefully, potentially bring that area in closer. If I get back to maximum capacity again, with more horses closer to home, I can look at some of those routes that are on the periphery of my travel zone. Like, hey guys, sorry, here's a farrier or a barefoot trimmer in your area. I'm trying to bring my travel area in. And that's definitely something I've been very recently doing and considering. And I also got my my car back on the road. Because I was also driving a big diesel truck. Like, we have two big diesel trucks. One's an F-250 and one's a Dodge Ram 3500. And those things are so expensive to maintain and run. I had to get a whole new set of tires for my dually. And, I think about 3.5 years ago, when I last put a set on, it ran about $180 a tire. And now this time I paid around $300 for a tire, for 6 tires. So overall that cost me, I think, around $2,000 just to put tires on my truck. And I was like, this is not sustainable. Right. Like, I'm not a traditional farrier. I don't have to, thankfully, haul around a forge and an anvil and a lot of the materials that most traditional farriers have to. Like, I need to get back in my vehicle that is less expensive to run. So unfortunately, the only reason I wasn't driving it was because I hit a deer back in November. And like, as you know, though, like I say, I hit the deer, but really deer hit you, right?
Yeah. Gosh, yeah.
So, but, and even to just repair my vehicle to keep costs down, like thankfully my husband is talented enough to do repairs like that himself. And we went to a salvage yard. We spent a day, took a whole day off work, went to a salvage yard, found parts for it, and he repaired it to get it back on the road for me, because he knew that driving the trucks was costing me so much money. Mm-hmm. And I think, when I started running the numbers, I was shocked at what I was paying just to be a mobile service, right? Let alone the actual cost of doing the job or the hidden costs. Like, the cost of being a mobile service alone are fairly astronomical, when you put it all down to pen and paper. Yeah. Shocked.
And I know that we've sort of kind of left out that huge part of our business is, the inflation and the changes in the economy, especially right now, that directly bites into our, like, what we end up paying ourselves in our income. Mm-hmm. I think that, there were times before I narrowed my range that I was driving over 200 miles a day. And that's something where those costs have to come from somewhere. It's so when we show up at a horse, that trim is already, like, we already have lost money. Like, you lose money before you pick up the hoof. If you show up and you don't trim and you leave without getting paid, that's like a huge amount of money that you just spent just getting in your truck or getting in your car.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I'm just thinking, like, since we're all from different areas too, I'm sure we end up traveling like different amounts, like in the States, in a lot of the places where we practice, like everything's so spread out that sometimes it can be really challenging. Like for some of these more rurally located farriers and trimmers, like they may have to travel an insane, do an insane amount of miles daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, just to get to their clients. Like I'm fairly lucky. I live next to a very populated area. So there's a lot of people, there's a lot of horses, and I'm probably not going to have to drive as far as some of these other farriers and trimmers do. So I don't want it to sound like I'm just complaining about driving and like fuel costs, because I know so many people have it so much worse, than I do, or take a much bigger hit than I do. But it's a huge consideration that I think gets overlooked. And we forget too that I think being a mobile Hoofcare provider is something it's relatively new, in the big scheme of things. Like farriers you used to go to the farrier, right? They used to have a forge set up and you would travel there with your horse. And so they didn't have a lot of the same expenses. And I think some farriers are also trying to get back to that. Like I know a couple people that are haul-in businesses only. And I don't know I don't know. That's new territory that I would like to investigate. And I think I'm going to try to.
Yeah.
But some people are very successfully running haul-in only businesses.
I was just going to say, I'm actually looking into that too. Not a haul-in only business, but having an option for truck-ins. And and I was like, oh, I wonder if I can charge less by doing that. And
no,
and that's the thing. Yeah,
actually make money. Make money for yourself.
But it's not even that. Like, I don't think yes, I'll save a lot of money in gas, but like you have to consider insurance on your property or the property you're renting for running a business. Liability insurance. Like I would be looking into leasing a small area on a farm because I don't have the property to do truck-ins. So I have to not only pay for the lease monthly, but also pay for extra and liability to make sure I'm covering if something happens to their property. You can't necessarily book the same amount of time per horse because you might have to juggle somebody who's coming in late. Like they hit traffic. And so you have to factor that in, but also making sure that you're not having horses that don't know each other in close quarters and passing each other. You have to budget for that. Right. So there's costs in everything. And what I was going to say is that I don't know who first posted about this, and I wish I could give them credit because it's awesome and it's hilarious. But when people are talking about, trimming and caring for horses' feet, like if we think about people, a person might go to a nail salon and sit in a nice comfy chair and get their toenails done, their fingernails done. And I don't know, in my area, okay, I don't get my nails done, but I don't know. It's like $25 for a manicure and maybe like $45 for a basic pedicure. And now consider how like we are basically doing that, except we're driving to somebody's house, picking up the legs on a 1,000-pound animal that could kill us, fighting them to make sure, like basically doing this service on an animal that might not necessarily want that done, and beating up our body. And people complain when some people complain if our costs are more expensive than what they might pay to get their toenails done in a salon. And it's just like, it's just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, it's not even comparable. Yeah.
Right.
Like, well, also, I've never peed on my pedicurist. Like, it's not a risk.
That's a fair point.
Like, most people who are getting their feet done aren't at risk of death if I pick out at them. and honestly, like they're hoping to get this service done that's going to keep their horse sound and moving and working. Like if somebody at a nail salon cuts my toenail too short, like it might hurt a little bit, but I'm probably not going to be at risk of losing a career because of it. And yeah, it's just when you put it in that perspective, it's funny because sometimes the prices are comparable. And should they be? Like
Right?
Well, it's just like, I think so much of what we've talked about in this conversation is like, whether it's like a hidden expense or, things that people aren't maybe necessarily thinking about or what we don't think about until it comes up to bite us in the ass, which is like, hello, that's basically my business model is don't think about it until it goes wrong. Right. Don't recommend. But really, like, when it comes down to it, we provide this super valuable service. And, it's not that long ago that I was not able to do this and I had to pay somebody to do it. And I remember there were a couple times where I was like, cool, when I got my bill, but I never was like, oh, this is not worth it, because it was my horse. Like, I needed them to be comfortable and sound and healthy. And to me, it's just part of responsible horse ownership. And so I try really hard to like re-enter that perspective when I'm feeling anxious about raising a price or like setting a price or thinking about what I need to charge people, because this is like an insanely valuable service. And if somebody wants to or needs, like, no shame if somebody can't afford my services. I don't judge. That's totally fine. But, it's not about devaluing what I do to fit somebody's budget, because I'm providing something that's like super important to the horses. We all are. And, money as an owner, money is obviously a big part of the equation, but it's not the only one. I could go buy a $300 saddle and put it on my horse's back and like hope for the best. And if that's all I can afford, well, okay, maybe I'm going to do that. Hopefully not. But, I can also do what I did and buy like a $4,500 saddle, but I'm fine to do it because it keeps him healthy and happy and comfortable and sound. And that's what we're doing. We're keeping horses sound and healthy and comfortable and really contributing to their quality of life and their owner's ability to do what they want with them. That's so valuable. We're doing good work, ladies.
That's such a good point. I think we really overall as an industry undervalue ourselves.
Yeah.
And get so concerned over what other people are going to think about everything.
Yeah.
Everything that we do and what we value our services at. So no, I love that you brought that up. That's such a good point. Because I know, like, it's every time I've had to raise prices, or I shouldn't say had, but every time I have raised prices, it's been terrifying for me, and I talk to other professionals, like, how should I word this? How should I approach this? How much should I go up? All these questions. And I hate talking shop. Like, I could talk all day about the owner's horse, nutrition, biomechanics, all of that. Super confident and fine discussing that with the owner. But when it comes to price, I am absolutely terrified. The price of those services and the cost of that knowledge that I'm sharing with them. And I know we didn't fully discuss like the elephant in the room. I think worldwide we are all in the same boat right now. It's not just something that's happening in the United States or Canada or Scotland. It's happening everywhere. And everyone is aware of inflation rising at a tremendous rate. Yeah, going up really high at very great speeds. And so everything's going up. And like we said, I know when I run the numbers, my number one cost as a mobile service is the cost of running and maintaining my vehicle. Right. Second to that is probably rasps. If I'm being honest, right?
Yeah.
And but yeah, so number one cost as a mobile service is my vehicle. For sure. So everything that's going on right now with inflation and the cost of fuel and gas going up, I think it's hitting everybody really hard. And I know it's hitting clients hard as well. And so it's been a mental struggle with me. I still haven't changed anything yet. I'm still vacillating back and forth as to what I think I should do for my business, whether that's a increase in price per horse, because I think cost of tools and materials has gone up on average like 15 to 25%. Does that sound about right for everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then depending on what you drive, like I said, I was lucky to get back in my gas vehicle, but the overwhelming number of farriers drive diesel trucks, right? Maybe a gas truck. And so that's even more expensive. That's huge costs to run those vehicles. And I know we're all staring at these numbers in the face, and we're all kind of not sure what necessarily to do. Like, we know that something's going to have to change, right? Or there's a chance that if we don't go up, like, we might have to get a different job. Like, that's kind of the reality that is staring, I'm sure, many people in the face, especially like people that are new to the industry that maybe don't have full books yet, or like we said, are undercharging to try to get clients. Like, they're not going to survive. And we need as many young people as possible to work in this industry. I think the average age of like most people in professions that are similar, like plumbers, electricians, any type of trade, the average age is like 55 to 60 years old. So it concerns me for the entire industry what we are going to see happen. What changes are going to occur. Like we are all obviously going to have to go up in our prices one way or another, right? Whether it's a trip charge, an increase in a trip charge, or an increase in the price per horse, or an increase in the shoeing services that we offer. Otherwise, at some point, it won't become feasible for us anymore to operate our business. And we may have to look at other avenues of employment. And that scares me for the industry as a whole. All those factors that I just discussed. Like, is this going to become a wealthy person's game? Are they going to be the only ones that can afford to maintain their horses, for dental care, hoof care, vet care, just the overall cost of owning a horse? And it's really concerning to me overall. So I don't know if anybody else has anything to add on that subject.
Yeah, and I have the same concerns. Especially I drive a diesel. I do have a trailer, but it's not set up yet. I bought it last year, and it's just a cargo trailer. But one prime example is I do my oil changes every 5,000 miles because I have a 6-liter Ford, and they are very fussy about their maintenance. And doing my own oil changes, it's between $100 and $150 every time that I do it.
Yeah.
And then to kind of put it into perspective, so I was in Southern Illinois this past weekend. So I was down there Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and it was just over 1,000 miles when I got home. So I do oil changes very frequently. And, I'll change the fuel filter every other oil change, and tires. We're not going to talk about that because
that's funny because we have a 6.0 too. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. And even I don't know about you guys, all of our vehicles are old.
Yeah.
I'm
same.
Ours are all, I think, 2004s. And looking at the prices of new vehicles, or even the price of used vehicles, I was looking, I have a Chevy Trailblazer. It's an 04 Chevy Trailblazer. And I was just looking when it was out of commission, what it would cost me to replace it. And it would cost me today what I paid for it back in 2008. I'm like, that's crazy.
Wow. Yeah, I drive crazy. A 14-year-old bright yellow Volkswagen Golf. And I just shove everything in the back. It's getting to the last times that it can do this for me. And yeah, I really wish that I bit the bullet and bought a new vehicle even last year, because the inflation is just even used vehicle prices. Like you said, I was talking to a used dealership in my area, and they just they tried not to laugh at me when I told them my budget, but they were like, yeah, I guess we'll call you if something comes in. It's like, okay, great. See you never. Yeah, but I don't know. I think I'm going to have to hop off in a sec, but in terms of inflation, I think Kristin, I think that was you who said that this first little bit about worrying about the industry. I mean,
oh yeah,
I think that really kind of sums it up, right? Everyone really is in the same boat. And so however we choose to deal with it, or need to deal with it as practitioners and as business owners, things are going to change, and we're all going to try and scrabble on to survive. And I feel my perspective so far has been I'm sure my clients are feeling it the same way that I am. And so my goal isn't to be like totally unscathed. Like I don't want to be milking the fact that I'm providing a needed service. And so like, oh, hey, nothing's changed for me. I'm just going to put my prices up and be totally fine. But also walk that line of not subsidizing for other people the fact that they're going through it, because you flip it around and so are we as practitioners. So like, it's really hard times, and we're just trying to walk that line. I think all of us of keeping our heads above water and doing what's fair without either kind of taking advantage of people or, on the flip side, just subsidizing what we are both going through.
It's an incredibly difficult one because, like, we're all going through it. The fuel has gone up, but then that has a knock-on effect on food and everything else, and hay, and every single person is suffering excess costs.
I have to hop off. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to say, like, thank you. It was really nice to meet and chat with all of you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, talk to you later, I hope.
Yeah. Have a good rest of your day. See ya.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to have to get going too. But I really appreciate all your time and all your comments, and I think this will be great.
Awesome.
Right. Okay.
Thank you so much for doing this, and I really appreciate all your comments, and this was a fun conversation, so I'm so glad you all hopped on.
It was. Thank you for bringing us all together, Alicia, and everything that you do. No I learned so much from all your podcasts.
I do
They're
too,
wonderful.
not from what I say, but from what other people say.
Love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
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 I always say that I'm slightly more hoof obsessed than the average person, and chances are, if you're listening to a Hoofcare podcast, you are too. So we should probably be friends. Feel free to find me on Facebook or email me at thehumblehoof@gmail.com.